This fall, the Cumberland County Public Library is hosting a book discussion series. Librarian Anessa Olson previews the Let's Talk About It program, Beyond the Battlefield, Alternative Views of War.
Let's Talk About It is a program run by the North Carolina Humanities Council in conjunction with the State Library of North Carolina. What happens is that we have 5-book series on a variety of topics. This fall's topic is Beyond the Battlefield, Alternative Views of War. We have 5 books that you can read, and then you can come to the library and attend a brief lecture and a discussion led by local scholars, writers, and thinkers. This fall, we're pleased to welcome Jane Andrews, Ann Baker, and Jose Ocaña to the library to lead the discussions. The 5 books that we're reading this fall, we're going to start with March by Geraldine Brooks. It's a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. It's a bittersweet and dramatic story, and it actually tells the story of March, the absent father from Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. He's an idealistic chaplain who joins the Union Army during the Civil War. He witnesses cruelty and racism, not just in the South, but also by the Union soldiers, that really shatters his faith and shakes his beliefs in the Union. His struggles with moral ambiguity ultimately lead to a debilitating illness, and when he goes home, he has to not only recover physically, but also try and reconnect with the family that has grown strong in his absence and try and figure out how to explain to them the things that he has witnessed. The next book we're going to be reading is All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Remarque. This sobering and thought-provoking novel is an unsparingly realistic account of World War I, which many of us probably know was one of the most terrible wars in history. It's told from the point of view of a patriotic German soldier whose name is Paul Baumer. This book has everything: humor, horror, coarseness, unexpected beauty, and pathos and comradeship as he and his companions struggle with the terrible grind of trench warfare. But it is also a clear-sighted examination of the toll of war on the soldiers who are fighting it. It's also possibly the greatest war novel ever written. Moving on to World War II, we're going to be reading The Reader by Bernhard Schlink. It's a compelling and complex novel which is actually set several years after the end of the war. It tells the story of a 15-year-old schoolboy, Michael Berg, who falls ill on the way home from school in Berlin and is rescued by a much older woman, a mysterious and enigmatic Hannah. The two of them eventually become lovers and settle into a really peculiar relationship, which includes Michael reading aloud to her from the classics. Some months later, Hannah vanishes mysteriously and without a trace, and he never sees her again until he's 23 years old and a promising law student, where he rediscovers her as the defendant of a Nazi war crimes trial. It's a very dramatic and very interesting read, and it really probes the nature of moral responsibility, love, and guilt. It's a very complex and moving tale. James Brady's The Coldest War tells the story of Korea. He was a popular novelist and columnist, and he's telling his experiences as a young platoon commander during the war. It begins with his arrival in November of 1951, just in time for the long and terrible winter the soldiers had to endure. He describes the bitter cold and grinding boredom, as well as the sharp terror of combat. His book is a true account, it's a memoir, and it's really interesting look at the brutal realities of a war many Americans have since forgotten. Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried is not so much a factual account of the Vietnam War, even though it is semi-autobiographical, as a collection of short stories, essays, and reflections that are so closely linked that they can be read as a single book. It begins with a description of the talismans and treasures carried by OBrien and his platoon. Everything from mine detectors to love letters to lucky charms, even soap. They explore the jungle, they encounter the enemy, and they carry all of these things with them. What's really interesting about it is that OBrien not only lists the things that they carried, but also the weight, and includes things like fear, shame, love, courage, and each other. Beyond the Battlefield, Alternative Views of War is a really valuable program that's going to spark interesting discussions with ourselves and with our community. If you're interested in participating, I encourage you to check out the book at your local library. You can also put it on hold from our website. This website is also a great source of information about Let's Talk About It and about other library programs and events.